Just takes a few minutes to load. Okay, I think yep, and here we are. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Friday Facebook Live. I'm your host, Sarah Harvey, Community Engagement Manager at PlanTracker. PlanTracker is a team of people who really want to see everyone in Australia self-direct their lives. PlanTracker communicates and participates in this community by offering quality plan management service, and we also support individuals to successfully self-manage their plan. So today I am really thrilled and excited to have a friend and a valued community partner joining me today for this Facebook Live, Caroline Daley of PlanHELP. Caroline, I know that we've known each other for, I was actually trying to count and do the math the other day. Is it around about 5 years?
Yeah,
5 years. Yeah. And I think back to that time when I first met you at a community event back in, I think it was Charlestown Library or something, somewhere around there. And I think about how far we've journeyed in this NDIS community since then. It's been incredible, hasn't it? So much has happened since then. But before I trip down memory lane, how about I just explain to everybody your role as a specialist support coordinator and also an NDIS consultant. Caroline, for those who don't know you, would you be able to just spend a bit of time at explaining who you are, what brought you to this space, and also describe some of the work that you're most passionate about?
So thanks, Sarah. Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it. I have been part of the NDIS since before it actually began. So lived in Newcastle and was involved in the 12 months prior to the NDIS actually launching. I have a daughter who has an NDIS plan, so she was one of the first people in the country to get a plan. And then I was contracted by the NDIS, or Disability Care Australia as they were back then, to write the self-management training, as well as train some of the planners as the different stages through trial rolled out.
Right.
Since then, I've done a lot of self-management training, which is where we originally met.
Yes.
And I actively put off being a support coordinator as such, and only ended up doing this role due to market failure. So I basically found that too many people in our community, so people with disability and their families, were not being able to navigate, not being able to accurately tell their stories to the agency and get the required levels of funding. And so ended up stepping in to sort of fill that gap that was there. I had also hoped that as a community-driven market, that we would have more community members actually leading and showing what was required in that space, rather than relying on some of the, I guess, the decisions being made around service delivery from a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
And so just throwing something else different that's in there to be able to do that. So at the moment, we do a lot of work with families who have done exactly that. Tried to tell their stories to the agency and haven't been able to get the funding that's required for what their support needs are, and then support coordination around how to implement those plans, but also around gathering some of that evidence.
Yeah, there's a lot going into it, and I think one of the phrases that I really I like that I've learned from you, Caroline, is this idea of painting a picture. You need to paint a picture or bring that picture, and then be able to have the ability to match it, I guess, or conclude it at the point to where the agency needs to see the key evidence. Yeah, and that's the part. Well, that's really the point of why we decided to do this Facebook Live this morning, isn't it?
It is.
It's around that whole point, which is when families and individuals are preparing for their NDIS plan review.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, without further ado, let's jump straight into the content, because I know that we've had so much interest and so many people are really keen to hear what you have to say about approaching the current climate, I guess. Can we call it climate, the current situation, or the goings on? The goings on. The first thing I want to explain to the community as well is that this is current information based on our lived experience and also what you are seeing every single day in your role, isn't it, Caroline? So what's going to happen in the future, we might, predict or maybe we have our own personal thoughts, but we don't know. So right here, right now, we're going to aim to give the most current and relevant information for right now. So jumping in, let's talk about, first and foremost, we're going to cover all the different types of plan reviews, and we're going to give descriptions or definitions to those, and then talk around some of the key points about how they interact, I guess, what's going on in the back of the agency, and then how we might experience some of that, that loop. We're going to also talk about preparation for each of those potential outcomes. But first and foremost, how are plan reviews being operated? Are they still with the LAC and also a delegate? What are the options, or what are the choices?
So if you're in the early childhood, early intervention space, you'll still meet with the early childhood partner, and that will either be via video, phone, and that may be someone who's not in your local area. If you do happen to have a face-to-face meeting, then obviously your local area becomes the one. So what we're seeing at the moment is, even in that space where there are some established relationships with early childhood partners, they're not always the ones who are conducting some of the virtual training meetings. They're actually, so those ones go through, and then similar with the LACs. So they at the moment seem to be a little bit more based locally, but we have still seen some instances where someone a bit further away, so usually within the same LAC partner group, but not necessarily geographically located. Take that on. So where people have had longer standing relationships with an LAC, we're not seeing that being the case. Quite as much as it has been in the past. So and
so then the burning question then, does it matter? What about if you've had 3 plans with the same LAC and all of a sudden you get a call, hi, I'm going to be reviewing your plan, and who are you and where are you from, and you don't know them? Does it matter?
No. They all do the same job. They all come with the same skills. We obviously know that some, be they LACs, planners, early childhood partners, are maybe a little bit more personable than other ones. Some of them we feel a little bit more comfortable telling what's happening. But if we're using evidence-based data that we're giving them, so the right reports from the right professionals, then a lot of the rest of it doesn't. So when we're talking about painting a picture, some of that is the story that we tell as family members, as people with disability themselves, but also around the evidence that we have from the professionals that are engaged in our life. And that's where the person in front of us is less important than maybe it was in the past. So we've all pretty much had plans for a period of time. There's a small, obviously, group over in Western Australia that are sort of in that first year or so. But for most of the country, we're into our second or third sort of plan review. So we've got a little bit of stability. We know what to expect. We've seen a lot of these things before, and we know what works for us. And those things still work no matter who's in front of you.
All right. Well, that's good news. Let's lead with the good news. Hey? Lead with the good news.
I think it is.
So let's start with this idea of plan renewal, and you can go through and talk about some of the other terminology. I think it's really important to lead with what the definition is, or what the technical, I guess, NDIS name is, and definition. But then also, Caroline, I really wanted you to share and help people understand what some other names they might be hearing on Facebook, for example. We know Facebook groups are a really key way that people learn and absorb information about the schemes. So if you could tie those two in as we're going along, that would be really helpful.
Really helpful. I will do my best, because language changes quite quickly.
It does.
So one thing that we understand one day often has a different meaning the next day. So what we're seeing at the moment, I guess, within the agency, is that we're moving from what they would have had as their period of transition into their period of continuous improvement. So they've already started flagging changes in language from reasonable and necessary to fair and equitable. What we probably expect at this point in time is that the systems behind the scenes are still going to be fairly similar in amongst how some of those things will react. So a plan renewal is typically the same plan that you had before, duplicated. And that's what we as a community understand that to be.
Okay.
From an agency's perspective, it is, except for some of the things that shouldn't be renewed every year. So if you've had some expensive assistive technology, so you've had a wheelchair funded or something, you're not going to get a second.
It's a one-off, right? It's a one-off,
It's a one-off. We're also seeing some stuff in some of the capacity building spaces where, again, and families have expected that would get duplicated, but they were put into the plan as a single year sort of thing. So we are seeing some things where there is a little bit of a misunderstanding.
Are you talking, when you say capacity building, are you talking about things like therapy, or are you talking about maybe some funding in, around support to make friends or get out in the community, participation? Can you just explain which one you might be talking about?
So we're seeing that in both. So if funding has been put into a plan, say in year one, so this is the year that we're just about to review, and there was funding in the therapy budget for functional assessments, that funding won't get duplicated as part of that plan renewal. So we're actually seeing a bit of a reduction in there. But again, it's not clearly stated up front. So it's a little bit around understanding what your plan has and how your plan was built and what was expected from that, as to, I guess, an indication of what funding will get duplicated in that plan renewal sort of phase. And the same with some of that CB social or education sort of, so the school leavers funding is, again, there for 1 or 2 years. And they may sort of come out of that plan. So we are seeing where, I guess, communities' understanding of a renewal, which is, exactly the same thing, is not necessarily being what's happening on the ground. And that's typically the reason why that is. So the agency has funded things that they've expected to only put in for a year. And they've removed.
And that may have not been really clearly understood when it was delivered the first time. That's interesting. I think that's a really good point to note, isn't it? And when they say, so an example, this comes up and gets quoted as LAC saying this, LAC saying this on the phone a lot recently. They and families have said to me, the LAC called and said to me, do I want a rollover? Or do I want to go to plan review? And they're encouraging me to have a rollover. So first of all, is a rollover anything different than what you've just explained? And what's happening with that? I'm not sure if that's a direct quote or whether people are interpreting the language.
The language is the same. Look, so plan renewal, rollover, extension are all kind of the same. So a rollover and a plan renewal are pretty much identical. So you'll encounter potentially that same issue. We've also had a thing called a plan extension for the last couple of months that's popped up, where there hasn't been able to be a planning meeting in an appropriate amount of time. They've actually extended the plan. So rather than give you a new start date as well as an end date, so a plan renewal or a rollover will give you a new plan with a new start date, new end date. Plan extension will keep the original start date and will extend out that end date. And as a result of doing that, you actually still get access to some of that unused funding that was previously in there. They're not offered to very many people. It was flagged by the agency as sort of being a point in time through sort of May, June, when they were trying to do some other things. But that will be one of those, I guess, things that we see through some of the Facebook pages where people are going, but I got a whole year's worth of funding and I've still got access to this. They met a certain criteria to enable that. Where other people are being told a rollover, and they're either getting exactly the same plan again, or where there've been some individual years worth of funding, a little bit of a reduction.
And I think that's the trick, isn't it, Caroline? It's we're hearing and we connect a lot about our individual timelines, and when we connect on Facebook and we describe what's happening, then we see so many different variations. But sort of what you've explained there is that essentially we're looking at a very similar thing where it's either renewal, except for those short-term items, and then it's just the dates are both moved, the start and the end date are both moved. An extension, which is, it's almost like it's a help to the agency to catch up. They aren't quite ready, and so they just do this, they extend it out. The ends, and then it gives them a chance. And then what you'll find is once that is renewed, it is actually the start date and the end date both move together.
Yes.
Have I got that clear?
No. That's that's clear from my perspective. Hopefully everyone else understood that. Because it does feel like one of those you need sort of graphs and charts and things to
we need a visual.
One of the questions that you asked was if they ring up and they say, do you want this, do I say yes or do I say no? For a lot of people, if things have been going reasonably okay and they're not expecting any changes in the next sort of year or so, then a plan renewal is quite a good choice. So you don't have to go through the full planning meeting. You don't have to discuss all of everything that you sort of would at some of the other plan types.
What about evidence and reports? If you've been offered a renewal, do you start asking for progress reports from all your therapists? So
they won't, by doing the renewal, the intention is that plan is pretty well just duplicated as to what it was. So any of the information that comes through from the therapist is not going to impact that decision and won't be able to impact the decision. So the process that goes, I guess, behind the scenes from the agency side of it is that they will just duplicate it, take out the couple of things, so your wheelchairs and whatever that are not in that sort of second year, and that will be there. So if you now have a speech pathologist or someone recommending an increase in hours, this won't be the right review type for you, unless you go, actually, we're not going to do that amount of therapy. My kid's a bit therapied out, or I'm a bit therapied out, or whatever the case is.
Or heck, I can't find a therapist. And I might use a therapy assistant at a lower rate, and then it's going to work. So doing some of that mathematics, isn't it, on the side is really important. So
if you've got them, by all means submit them, but they're not going to change the result
in a renewal.
So if you've got a degenerative condition, then a plan renewal is not usually a good option for you. That's because you need some of that flexibility to have that conversation. So if your condition's deteriorated, you now have higher support needs, or are likely to in that next sort of 12-month period, then you'd probably choose a different plan type. If you or your child are going through a transition point, so
like high school,
starting high school, leaving high school, moving out of home, all of those types of things, then again a plan renewal is unlikely to be the right thing for you. If you've had even just a minor deterioration in condition, so you've gone from being a manual wheelchair user to a power chair user, that might mean that you're better off with a different review type. And if you're looking for any of the more expensive assistive technology items, then again, so if you do need an AT or a home mods budget, then again, this is probably not the review type. So this is pretty much, we're at a stable point in life. Nothing much is really expected to happen in the next year or so. It's all going well. We have appropriate support needs. And for a lot of people, that's exactly where they find themselves. So
the one question I do have is, what about consumables? Is that considered something that's going to change over time? For example, if it's continence products or things like that, are they pretty much, and especially if maybe we're looking at something like a young child, would that be able to be duplicated or replicated or extended or
so
in a renewal?
So your consumables around incontinence products, or also around the hens, so the tube feeding type of products, they will just get duplicated as they were, on the basis that they're typically approved into plans where they are lifelong, they tend to not, or at least for that period of time long, they tend to not overly change
Okay.
in terms of needs. But again, if you've gone from, I guess, a child you've been able to purchase things at the supermarket reasonably cheap, and you've now got to, and so you buy them on special sort of thing, and now you've moved to a size.
A supplier,
You've got to go to a supplier and there's additional costs involved. That may not be the right sort of review for you, just for that.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So let's just summarize then. If the options for choosing a renewal, if everything in relation to support needs is fairly stable, or fairly, when I say stable, I'm saying similar. It's a similar picture. Keeping in mind that there may be supports that come in either, even a CB budget or a capital budget that the agency may have written them in as a one plan thing. So they will potentially disappear, even if it's called a renewal. And the only other thing I wanted to ask, because we got this question through the week, is I opted for a renewal, and then the LAC asked me if I wanted to go from a 1-year plan to a 2-year plan. And so does that mean that it is a renewal if I also change the length of the plan? Yeah.
If they've approached you with that and they're using that language, then yes, it'll be the same. So they will put in a double of that 12-month funding, again, with the caveat around anything that they had previously put in for 12 months. So that's right. Yeah. Take out. And again, if 2 years works and you can see that things are going to be fairly similar over that point in time. So often in those early primary school years, we're often, as parents, sort of settling into a bit of a routine. Things are kind of set. We know what we're doing. And that may be a really appropriate thing at that point. Or again, mid-20s, early 30s, later in life, you can sort of go, yeah, look, the next couple of years, I'm not expecting anything much to be different. And you might be comfortable to take that 2-year plan, just to not have to do the new planning meeting. So
that was my next question, Caroline. You beat me to it. What are some of the, while I understand why it does come with some intrepidation, I guess, or nerves around, am I committing to longer? That's even longer to sort of, deal with one plan that you may not be happy with. But what are some of the advantages of pushing that out to 2? Or actually, I've seen a 3-year plan more commonly as well. What are some of the positives, I guess, for participants?
Look, the main one really is you don't have to do the planning meeting. And that's probably from everyone's perspective. I find particularly in the work that I do with the clients that I work with, that a planning meeting is incredibly stressful. So it can mean that for the 2 months after a planning meeting, there's still high anxiety and not ability to really get in and do the work. And even 3 to 4 months before the next planning meeting, that starts to build. So everything is focused around this one point in time of preparing for or recovering from a planning meeting, which only leaves a few months to actually do some really functional, useful work. And if you've got stability at that point in time, you're not expecting things to change, a similar level of funding will work for you. Just to not have to do that and not have to think about it is really more than enough reason, I think, for most people to take that on. So
you're absolutely right. It does really, there is quite a buffer. It's not just a one point in time, a couple of hours of meeting and maybe asking for reports. Certainly in my circumstance, I started to sort of, I guess, not make as many sort of commitments to the services and supports I had, because I really wasn't sure. And I was genuinely scared of getting some things in place and, continuing on and making some plans and then having to pull it from them, and from us as well, and saying, oh, no, we don't have hours for this support worker. I'm going to have to let them go and things like that. That kind of, sometimes you do have to think about, in the worst case scenario, what will happen. And so it does lead into that support time, I guess, that day-to-day practical living that you have, and the opportunity to use support. So it is a bit of the idea that you can do 2 years or 3 years and just think about that and not think about the admin side of it as much.
And I think that does have a lot of benefits. And like you said, if you've got support workers, so if you're using more independent support workers over the bigger agencies where staff will change, it is, look, we've got a plan review meeting coming up. I'm really not sure if I'm going to be able to keep you on afterwards, is a real concern for a lot of people. Whether it ends up that way or whether it doesn't, it's still one of those points in time that you feel like you need to have that conversation around what you promise going forward. So,
and you think about the workforce, Caroline, like if you were encouraging really great support workers to stay and make this, a really a full-time occupation, or a substantial, not just I'm covering off, and passing through. If we really want that, then stability is a key part of that, isn't it? So I can see how these longer plans are going to, over time, really help our community to build some resilience, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Around these points. Yeah.
And look, and to get to a point in our life as a family where we can look at the next couple of years and go, actually, that'd be good. We can't see anything major changing, and the support needs are pretty appropriate for what we need at the moment. That's actually a really nice spot to be in, to be honest.
It is.
Yeah.
And 12 months goes fast. Like you talk about the times, beginning and end where you sort of sometimes it's winding down or it's a bit of a distraction. Yeah. But in myself too, if I'm looking at finding implementing either a new therapy or support, or trying to build capacity, particularly for my younger son, in a new way, it takes a bit of trial and error, shall we say. And then I get to the end of I'm like, hang on a minute, we've only just started. I don't want to deliver, I've got so much more to do. And so that 12 months can be really, really fast. I mean, in our situation, it can be really short. So so much to think about. Okay, so what are we up to here? Let's see, plan renewals. Oh, light touch review.
Light touch review, these are my favourite. So,
is it?
Only because light touch review has changed its meaning so many times over the last 8 years that I've been involved. Both from
as of the 25th of June, 2021.
At this particular time of the day, this is where we're landing on it. So light touch reviews, I guess, have been understood by our community to be almost that, I don't know, the oopsie review is what I was calling it for a period of time. So a plan appears, it's not quite right. So it's come through as agency managed, not self-managed. It's come through with a category missing or those sorts of things. And so we've called that a light touch review. Take it and send it back to your planner or your LAC or your early childhood partner, and just get them to fix the bit that's been as a bit of an obvious mistake.
Okay.
We've often called that a light touch review. Within the agency, it actually has a bit of a different meaning. So there's been a period of time where they have been accepted like that. We still find that you can go back for your oopsie review where things have been done at different points. But we're also hearing some stories at the moment where that's not been the case, and people are being encouraged to go back through a formal unscheduled review process.
Okay.
So this is where I think the understanding within the agency probably comes a little bit more important than what we're seeing here at the moment. And I wouldn't be surprised as well. So through trial and also various other points in time over the last almost 8 years that I've been involved, they've tested different things in different areas. So again, this is one of those that I'll expect to maybe look a little bit different in different places. So again, getting into the Facebook, but I did this, and someone else going, but I did this, you can kind of both be right at different points in time where things are tested and trialed in different spaces. And with the agency meeting, as I said before, from that transition to continuous improvement, this is what we should probably expect to be.
That's a really good point. So what do you think? Okay, if it's one of the common ones that we're seeing at the moment is, it's got moved from self-management to plan management to self-management, or obviously, really undesirable, back to agency management. So what would you say, by and large, without knowing the circumstances of each individual plans, would you say you're going straight back and going, there was an error made, please correct it via light touch review?
Yeah. Look, That's the one, the initial approach.
Yeah. Okay.
You'll sometimes find some pushback where the request is to plan management because it adds that extra few $1,000s into the plan.
Okay.
So depending on where that sits, that may need to go through a slightly different process.
All right.
Behind the scenes in the agency. The others should technically be okay, but again, we're hearing things where they're going back through a different thing. This is often around, so a light touch review is often almost that midpoint, so where new assistive technology needs to be added in. So you've had a formal review process, you've got your plan for 12 months, and then you need some assistive technology and all the paperwork's ready to go. That's often the point where a light touch review from an agency's perspective actually comes into play. What we and so even some of those smaller home mods or any of those types of things, typically where they come in, what we would normally prepare is expect that they may look at everything. So even though you've just submitted that particular review, actually look at it and have all the other bits and pieces behind you, just in case it triggers it into more of a fuller review, which we'll discuss in a second. And what we're seeing is that where people have had the light touch reviews, they've had equipment or something added to their plans or the change of funding, is that we're a period of time. So got a 12-month plan.
Yep.
Say you're 3 months into the plan. What we're often seeing is a new, almost that 9-month plan. So still keeping that same end date, you get your new start date. Previously, that was often the only change that we'd see. What we're seeing at the moment is that sometimes the dollar figure changes. So if you haven't used that funding, you haven't used 3 months worth of funding in the first 3 months, it will look as though you've lost money.
That's right. Is it called pro rata? I'm not sure if that's the technical term for it, but essentially this is just my brain ticking over. This is moving towards the concept that the agency has already told us is coming, which is this deliverable. We'll give you funding month by month or every 3 months. And so even though you have got a longer plan, like we just talked about 2 and 3 years, but the agency is actually doing the figures or the budgeting actually month by month. So in that instance, if you were to get a piece of equipment added in, the date moves, and then you see a reduction, for example, in core, would it be safe to say that they've calculated what you apparently didn't use in the first 3 months?
And that seems to be the consistency in there. And
hey, can I tell you that goes against all my support and advice that I've been giving participants, which is plan out your budget. You don't need to spend it evenly. If you want to go on holidays and you want to save up some of your support worker dollars for towards, month 7 or 8, then go right ahead. It's up to you. Dilemma.
And the absolute right information to give during that transition period, and even technically now. So most people are not going to have a light touch review and have that plan prorated, and yet at that point in time where they are, here's your months or your 3 months worth of funding. So we're not at that point yet. Okay. So that's still, and I've given that exactly the same information as well. So, but expect that, the agency has already identified that they will be moving to that 1 month, 3 month expenditure, like budget thing within that. And you've got to like little bits you can roll over, but that's where this is moving towards. In that. So,
it's good to get that big picture stuff, isn't it? Because sometimes I feel as individuals or families, we also worry that we've fallen into a hole, like it's our family, our plan, our situation, and somehow that we fall. But sometimes getting that bigger picture of how the scheme is progressing along. And for so long, didn't we say it's brand new? They're still building it. They're still building it. But what we are seeing is that. So you called it the transition phase, didn't you?
Yes.
And now we're moving into
a continuous improvement. So, and that's what all organisations do, essentially. So transition was where all of the states transitioned across to the NDIS. So we saw the last parts of Western Australia roll over last year. And so now we expect, like any organisation that's done a bit of a startup phase and is moving into now what are we doing now? Yeah, and that's where we are.
So one of the things that you've mentioned to me when I asked you some questions a couple of weeks ago was about this service guarantee, because this sort of feeds into this other idea is, when am I going to get a call? You know,
Yeah.
and so often we see that, don't we? Families asking, well, it's 3 months away. Why are they calling me now? Or it actually ends next week and I haven't had a phone call. I don't know who to call. I'm not sure what's going on, and my portal looks the same.
Yeah.
And they're both, as you say, they're both correct. They're both correct. So can you tell us something about at what point the timeline is towards reviewing? Yeah.
So the participant service guarantee is not yet, I guess, enshrined. So it's there as a guideline at this point in time for the agency. The intent has been flagged by, I'm assuming, both the various ministers over the time, that it will become part of what we can expect once things, I guess, settle down and we're through some of these initial continuous improvement changes. What they have identified is that pretty much 2 months prior to, so 8 weeks before, 56 days. They do it in days. So 56 days before the end of your plan, they will start the process of initiating the review. So you can pretty much expect that somewhere 8 weeks prior to the end, your end date, you will get a call to set up the review meeting. Be it a plan renewal sort of conversation, typically not a light touch review at that point in time. So it's typically the plan renewal or the full plan review, which we're about to talk about. And so they're kind of the deadlines that you're working towards around that. What we're seeing is where they are able to stick to that particular participant service guarantee at the moment, so that 8 weeks beforehand, they're trying to arrange planning meetings about 6 weeks out. So what that gives is enough time to have that planning conversation for your LAC or your ECI partner or your plan, if that's who you happen to have, to do the stuff to build the plans, for them to go up to be checked, and then for them to come back down again. So, and again, at different points in time, we see the plans, your new plan starting either on the date that the old one expired. Occasionally we see them starting a bit earlier, and they're almost sort of point in time decisions that get made. So in the past, it's been because they've had a big rush in the end month of each quarter. So as those ones have come up for renewal, they've often sort of now ended at 11 months sort of thing, just so they can spread the workload a little bit smoother around that. So so they will, whether you get your new plan early or not, we kind of can't predict. A whole range of other things. But certainly we're telling you people to expect from that 56 days, 8 weeks beforehand, expect a phone call, and be prepared with that, I guess the scenario, I've had the phone call, do I want a plan renewal? Be ready at that point in time to answer.
That's right. And also, as you said, importantly too, is that it's not always going to be offered, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Is it? Is it? It's only offered under a certain matrix or scenario with the agency, and if it's not offered, then let's go through.
Oh, you're not going to believe this. I've got a fire alarm test about to start.
Oh, have you? Okay. Well, you mute. Okay, perfect timing. You mute. When it starts, because I need to check Facebook comments, because people are talking to us, and then we're going to check. So let's see what we have. Hey, Nick, thanks for joining us. So I can see, James says this is a perspective that I haven't heard spoken about a lot before. It's there's a reassurance attached to a long plan, renewal periods. Thank you. Providers will still require lump sums for programs. That's correct. Yeah, that's so true, Lisa, isn't it? About flexibility. Flexibility is certainly still defined and dictated, I guess you'd say, by the agency. So the monthly pro rata is something that I guess all of us, some of us may not be impacted by it potentially for a while or ever. It really depends on our situation. And as Caroline said, whether we have to go back with new things built into the plan. which would create a review, and that's where we'll see it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everyone for joining us. That's really fantastic there. Now,
I'm all safe.
Where are you up to, Caroline?
I'm
you're there.
Fire alarm wise.
No, okay, so there's no
that I could not plan for. I apologise.
That's fine. That's fine. It's a fire drill, so it's one of those things, you'd prefer to have that than go, hey, I actually smell smoke.
Absolutely. So yes, but we're all safe, so that's all good.
You're all safe. So Caroline, are we right to move on then to full plan review? What about if you're not offered any of those things, no renewals, rollovers,
Yep.
And so they said, we're going to plan a meeting. Need to get all your evidence collected, It's sort of like all bets are off. We're starting from scratch. I will say that sometimes families feel that way when they get that news and they get it booked in. And sometimes, have you noticed this? Sometimes there's not a lot of lead time. They say, let's meet next week. Bring all your evidence, or we'll plan it and submit it all, email it to me tomorrow, and then we'll meet next week. So first of all, is your reality. Don't feel too much pressure for that. If you do not have everything prepared and you will not have it prepared for next week, then state that and then push that date out, and try to come to some agreement about when that will occur, because it's a thing you have to give your therapist team, or anything else that you're going to supply, like quotes or anything, you will need time to do that. But I'll hand over to you. What do we do? How do we approach preparing for a full review?
So a full review, I actually like the wording that you use, treat it as though you're starting from scratch. So what we're seeing, again, at this point in time, is that in that move from reasonable and necessary to the agency now talking about fair and equitable, we are often having to start from scratch. So participants who have come over from old state-based schemes with no real paperwork or no evidence around things. So being able to almost prove all of the things that you're sort of saying. So, and this is where I guess a lot of the work that we do. So people sort of tell us the stories of their lives, but the documentation does not reflect that at all. And if we were the agency, we would build a plan based on the written documentation. So it's not saying that the agency doesn't believe what's happening. It's just that they have a process to follow, and that is around that written evidence from the right people who can say those particular sorts of things. So we also hear, I guess, a lot of times where they talk about, the speech therapist has said that I need 50 hours of occupational therapy. And they kind of can't. The OT has to say what that would be, unless it's been a massive gap in there previously, and there hasn't been any funding for, say, OT as part of that. So if you're looking at planning at having to go for a full plan review, gather what you've got. So even going back in terms of diagnosis and making sure that they're input on the system correctly. So that's another thing that we're seeing, is that where people have come across from an old system to the new one, they don't always have the most up-to-date or accurate information, and the agency has already flagged. So we've understood about typical reference packages in the past, which we've always sort of assumed were based partly on diagnosis. The agency has flagged with their independent assessment style of process that is one of, so diagnosis is one of the things that will get taken into account in making those 400 profiles that they're discussing at this point in time. So where you've got that evidence, use that. So in terms of diagnosis, and starting from there is always a good thing. The agency will also expect, I guess, things from your therapist, but more in terms of that functional. So we see a lot of reports that are written as little Johnny did 8 sessions with us, and it all went well. And that's kind of all we see written in the report. So, and
recommendations are to continue,
continue
to reach goals.
And 30 hours funding for the next one. So with no evidence of what's actually been done, baseline data, new data, sort of things. So, and that's what the agency is looking for when it comes to how they plan. So when they talk about fair and equitable, again, it's if you're doing the therapy, are you making gains? Are we expecting that to happen? What are you sort of looking to do towards that? So talking with your
it's measurable, isn't it? I'm just listening to you thinking, and I'm thinking, how would families read a draft report, and how would they know if it's heading in the right direction? It's got to have measurement in there, doesn't it?
Yeah. And you've got, I mean, so my daughter has significant high physical support needs.
Right.
And if I go, she's now in her early 20s. So if I go back to those early childhood sort of years, or even those 9, 10 sort of things, we were still doing a lot of therapy, so speech therapy, OT, physio at that point in time. Her gross motor skills have not changed since she was very, very young. So even though we were doing physio work, there wouldn't be something, I guess, measurable along those sorts of lines. So she's not now suddenly standing, walking, doing any of those things. She's a power chair user.
Okay.
But what a physiotherapist at that point could have done, we've done this standing, and that's working on bone density and hip alignments and a whole range of different things that actually give those benefits sort of through doing those things. So again, linking what's happened. So where there's not an obvious, we can now do up buttons. That's a really tricky one. We've mastered this. We're working towards this, and here's the things that we're doing, and this is why it's helping us work.
I love that you say that, because some of the reality is sometimes these goals are really long term, but the evidence that the therapists professionals need to provide is that incremental progress and isn't it, breaking it down into what are we actually working on here and here. It obviously ties into those big goals, doesn't it, those long term, but so many of them aren't achieved in a
funding bucket or sort of thing.
They're not neatly fit. Don't neatly fit into.
I'm not done this.
I've never been able to sit my autistic child down and say, we got 30 hours. Let's pump it out. Let's see what we can. It's not that approach at all. But we're sort of having to align our evidence and measurement to that place. That's really
and the allied health profession, they have a suite of tools that they can use to do those measurements. They have ways that they can gather baseline information and measure what those improvements are, and that's what we're expecting as parents, as participants with plans, and that's the stuff that we need to go into the review with. One of the other things the agency talks about is sort of that, what does your week look like? So how are you likely to? I personally struggle with this. No week looks the same, but I understand the intent of what they're looking to do and when it's coming. And when I actually pull it down, 80% of our weeks pretty much do look the same. Support at the beginning of the day, support at the end of the day, the middle of the day looks different, but actually those 3 days are the same. And I can sort of build a
totally
from what we do anyway.
Hey, do you mind if I interrupt you, Carol, and go back to a question that we've just Tony Skinner on Facebook has asked. So light touch reviews are not about a small increase in someone's funding at all. That's correct, isn't it? It's not about increasing. It's not the funding levels. It's about administrative errors or moving things around.
The categories more so.
The categories. Okay. All right. So where are we up to? So, okay, I did have one thing that people have, I promised some families that we would ask it, even though it wasn't in our scope document, Caroline. I'm going to sneak it in live on air. Carer's statement. Let's just, in a few minutes, without going into all the different details, what do you think about carers' impact statements? And families, absolutely, quite rightly so, they are looking for ways to paint that picture, to really help in written format when they're often not even meeting those people face to face. They're not seeing their children or their adult, in their home environment or wherever their, community environment. Using carer statements. What do you think about how much weight do they hold, and how much energy and time should we spend on them?
I hate them. I've never submitted one.
Okay,
that's
clear.
I don't think they're useful. That's where I land. And multiple reasons. So they're not evidence-based. So when the agency is looking for information that's evidence-based, your carer statement, if it's backed up and supported by therapist, psychologist, whatever, will help to bear weight to it. But it's actually the psychologists and the other therapists that are involved, that's the information that they're taking.
They have to write it in. Yeah. Okay.
So it needs to be in their ones.
Mm-hmm.
Where I find doing, I guess, a style of a carer impact statement is to help families understand complexities of life and and to get the jumble out of their heads onto paper.
Well, that's how you taught me, actually. I gave you, I delivered, in your role as paid support coordinator for my son, I actually delivered it to you, and then you helped, that gave you something to unpack from. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So we still use that technique. But actually then in your situation, we then went through the therapists and got their evidence around the things that you had highlighted that maybe hadn't been in some of their earlier reports around that. There are a few carer assessment tools that look at the strain that carers are on. So there's a couple that can be implemented by anyone. There's some more formal ones that need to be implemented by professionals. They are useful. So something, again, a measurable tool that's recognised by a profession or an industry that gives you some solid data around what that strain is. And
I think this is backed up by what's happening, because I've noticed some of the organisations that were funded through different ILC and other state-based mechanisms who were actually promoting or supplying a carer's impact statement template or guide on there have actually been pulled. Some of the organisations, I can't find them anymore. You know, if people say, oh, have you got a template? Oh, yeah. And they don't exist on the web anymore. The page has disappeared. And that's from three different sources, three different types of organisations that used to supply them. So I wonder whether it's this whole, we're understanding now more about what drives evidence or what's understood as evidence within the scheme. And so specific NDIS carers impact statements just written up with a whole kind of blurb isn't really a mechanism that's going to see a result if we're looking for increased funding or a particular type of funding. I guess the other thing, it's not always just like more capacity building. Sometimes it's actually, I really, really need a support worker to turn up every Thursday afternoon and help us with this particular thing. So writing your worst day, talking about in a planning meeting, plan review, talking about your worst possible scenario every time. I know that's common advice. I see that a lot. And I think maybe sometimes families have thought that's the thing that's gotten them across the line with funding. But it sounds like you're saying be more strategic in painting that picture and use your professionals to help you.
To do that. And often even just saying, this is our worst day, it happens 4 times a week. It happens 10 times a month. It happens. That will paint a more accurate picture. And it's also more believable. And for some people, that worst day is every day. And by all means, say that. But when you're living that, you've also got the therapists engaged who will know that that's the case, so they can write that in. So either from observable, functional, using tools that are recognised by their professions, or even just as an observation from what they have personally encountered. But that has the weight behind it over what you as and I guess the history of the carer impact statements, because having been in the NDIS from the beginning, the original probably 6 to 12 months through trial, it was very much just participant focused. So participant could go in and go, no, I don't need supports. Mum and dad are fine. They'll just keep doing everything forever. Mum and dad didn't get a chance to say anything at that point in time, because the legislation and how it was being interpreted and hadn't sort of changed was very much around what the participant wanted, their goals, all those sorts of things. So the carer impact statements came in at that to address that particular function, and also so that parents didn't have to have that conversation in front of a family member. So
I mean, that's valid, isn't it? That's completely valid.
My daughter and go, I actually really don't want to do this. I need someone else to take some of this load. That was their initial intent, and that's how they were used, and again through transition have served a purpose. But if they're being pulled from different sites, I'd say they're experiencing that thing. People are going through, I won't call it I guess the heightened emotions of writing what a day or a week or a year is, without it actually being helpful at the other side of it. So
I know you gotta, you know, and I say this so often, you know, my energy and my, you know, is precious, and I want to put it in the right places. Totally dedicated to doing all I need to do, you know, for my children to be an advocate and to everything. But I want that assurance. I want to know that I'm actually putting my energy towards and directing it towards not only the right way to, I guess, you know, sometimes we call it pressing that magic button. You know, is this piece of paper or saying this, is that going to press that magic mysterious button in the back of the NDIS that's going to deliver the support that I need? But I really need to know also, what do I need to learn? Because part of my journey, I think, with my boys, I think up to number 4 plan, or with both of them, I feel like I've got to learn. Over the years, I'm understanding more and I'm recognizing more, and I'm learning how to use the funding well, and to build their picture. And then part of that is resourcing me and understanding. So my time reading and asking questions, and I want that to count. And I know that so many of the mums that I do connect calls at Plan Tracker with, we're all the same sentiment, is that when we get frustrated and, I guess, you know, get emotional or vent, it's because we're looking for that reassurance that what we're doing counts. You know, that it's right, that it's that we do have access to the right information. So I think this big picture that you've given us over this past hour, Caroline, has been really helpful. You really step it out in such a clear way, and I think it helps us understand that the scheme, we're moving along with the scheme, aren't we, in Australia? The community's learning, the scheme's doing things, we're doing things, politicians are doing things, and we're having something to say about that. But some of these things have already been set in motion long before, I guess, or they were planned, weren't they? Or this is the way it was going to happen long before last month, or whatever the minister said 2 months ago.
And that's, I mean, some of the changes are the things that we've talked about, the funding ultimately being released on a monthly or 3-monthly basis. That was a consultation paper that came out October, November last year. So none of this is new.
But
it's still going to be a change that we need to learn how to navigate and what that sort of looks like. We have advocates trying to put a halt on some of the changes. But I guess still looking at right evidence from the right professionals is always going to be the key underpinning of whatever it looks like in the future. And making sure that that's part of what you've got, and reconfirming the diagnosis on file is actually the right one as well.
Absolutely.
You become part of those key bits of preparing for any of the plan reviews, but particularly that full review.
So just for our last few minutes, Caroline, I'm wondering if we paint a scenario that we've done a cracking job of getting through renewal, review. Well, actually, probably not renewal, but full plan review probably would be the case. And then, as we said, we started from scratch. We worked on our evidence, and we had those conversations with therapists so that the information they were supplying is very directly related to those therapy goals and measurement of such. And also the recommendations also have to be measured, don't they? So we've done all that. And then the plan lands and we go, it's not just an administration error, but we really think there's some fundamental flaws there. My first thing that comes to my mind is a S100 form, or I'm not sure if it's called that still, but RORD, which is a review. A review of a reviewable decision. So essentially what we're saying is, no, go back and look at it. The actual mechanism which built in the amount of funding. Or the absence of a category of funding, perhaps, is flawed, and you need to look at it again. Is that the only option, or the best option, or the primary option that people should learn about if they're in that situation?
Getting someone to relook at your evidence with a fresh set of eyes is probably a decent starting point. Once you start that review process, it looks at the evidence that has been provided, and what we're discovering is that a lot of people think they have really good solid evidence, and it's not. So there's gaps missing in there. So having someone else have a bit of a look through would probably be the recommended starting point.
Yeah, good.
When you're confident that that's the case, and certainly with the bulk of families that we work with, we plan all of our documentation to then support them through a first review if that's the case. Because keeping in mind, the I is for insurance, and so any insurance scheme doesn't necessarily have a cap, but it has a downward pressure on what their spend is. So they're ultimately not going to be get in trouble for not funding something. So expecting a review to be part of a process, it's there for a reason. It's not a bad thing. But if you've got all of that evidence ready and it is right and it is SMIC and it does cover everything that's needed, the recommendations are directly related back to the disability, all of those sorts of things. So it is all right. Yeah. So that review of a reviewable decision. So that's sort of section 100 review is the way to progress through that. If at that point, when you've had someone look at your documentation or you've had just a step back look at it and you go, oh, actually, we've missed this key piece of information, go and get it. So rather than trying to push something through that's not finalised, focus on getting that bit of missing information, and then you can go back through as a change of circumstances review with that additional information to help trigger that as part of it. So sometimes that'll be a diagnosis that hasn't been updated. So when you go back through, there's an autism diagnosis that doesn't have a level attached to it, or and so that in and of itself will be enough that the computer system is going to put that in as a level 1, which may result in what is I guess a mismatch between life and funding. And so getting that addressed, and then a change of circumstances, here's our new diagnosis, actually becomes an easier pathway through. And at this point in time, probably the more appropriate one.
Okay. All right. That's really good. That's really good. I mean, there's so much. We could go so deep into this, couldn't we? We could set ourselves up with some snacks and we could go for it. But I guess I just wanted to, well, first of all, thank you again so much for your time, Caroline. Let's go through, if people have burning questions and they think, oh my goodness, now that I've heard from Caroline, I just have so much more I want to unpack and things like that. I think the first and foremost to know is that we're not doing a one-shot, hey, we're going to talk about this and disappear. We're here in this community with you all, and we are working in this community, we're living in this community, and we're doing this NDIS work every day with our families as well. So today is a bit of a sort of an intro about the burning questions, and then Caroline and I are going to find a time in our schedule approximately 3 weeks from now, but we're trying to get that date as soon as possible to let you all know so that you can find the time to join us inside a webinar, because we've decided that U-Butte Q&A session will be the way to really add some more value, I guess, to this community. Sometimes it's great to talk in these broad principles, isn't it, Caroline? But then if we can also break some of that down and talk in scenarios or more specific language and circumstances, we feel that that's one way that we can assist individuals and families to, I guess, I don't like the word build capacity anymore. It's been overused, isn't it? Basically upskill and become more confident of tackling these things. So if you want to learn more about Caroline and the incredible work she does, you can find her on her website, PlanHELP, PlanHELP.com.au. I'll put the links below in the chat function as well. And me, well, you know where I am. I'm on Plan Tracker, plantracker.com.au. We also have a online closed group in Facebook, which is NDIS plan and self-management community. I'll also link that below if you want to come in and have sort of a more of a deep dive sort of chat. The search function in that group, I think I started approximately 3 or 4 years ago now. It's got so many great conversations, and while some of the information definitely now is outdated, as we said, we've passed through that time, but there's lots of resources and links that are still around, that are still really relevant and speak very powerfully to this idea that Caroline's talking about, is making sure that your evidence and making sure that this information that you submit through a plan review, whatever type it is, whatever you're submitting to the agency, is really of good quality and can really demonstrate the need, and can, as we say, press that magic button. Is there anything else really important that we need to cover off before we say goodbye to everyone?
Look, there's one, but it'll take me another 10 minutes, so we'll probably leave that one.
Well, you do that while I just check the messages, because multitasking is not my thing, as we know. I am going to get a partner though for our webinar who can do our Q&A and chat, so we won't be doing
all of this. So probably the other thing around the full reviews is being aware of what you're requesting in terms of funding. So being aware of what mainstream systems, so health, education, will fund, or it should be the responsibility of.
Yes, we didn't cover that. Yes,
that's the spot where we see a lot of people getting tripped up. So they're looking for supports in schools, which is not the responsibility of the NDIS. So they talk about handwriting where a child still has a challenge using a knife and fork. So similar skill set, grips, whatever, but one is a mainstream responsibility and one's not. So just being, I guess, aware of those sorts of things is another key part of that preparation stuff. So look, got it down in about a minute. So
you're really good. Hey, and that's really tricky. Hey, mums, I just want to say it to mums, because my children are in primary school. And one is transitioning to high school, and so the Department of Education probably has a bigger role in my life right now for transition, which is not the funnest thing. But I will say you can get mixed messages. So sometimes Department of Education will say, "Oh, you've got an NDIS plan." Yeah, just because they say that doesn't mean actually, no, they're hoping that you'll run away and go and take care of it yourself, perhaps. So it will save them 10 forms and 3 meetings. And so I would just say, just understand the legislation. There's legislation, obviously, which is accommodations and modifications, isn't there, in public education? Disability standards in education. Oh, now that I've mentioned, I'll have to go and figure out the document.
Disability standard sounds more... My child's a little bit out of school now, so I'm not
right. I'll figure it out and share the link.
Sounds right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Understanding that your evidence is something that the NDIS is fairly and squarely responsible for. Yeah. That's a good hint. Okay, well, Caroline, a huge thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much for making the time in your calendar and to come and join us for this really important conversation. I hope you've enjoyed our chat, and and I really look forward to, now you're committed. See, I've told Facebook you're coming back. Yeah. Excellent. So thanks so much for your time, and everyone, thank you so much for joining us. If you've joined us live, thank you very much. And I can see some thank you messages. Caroline, can you jump on afterwards and just check, because there's messages there. There's messages there directly to you, words of thanks as well. So yes, connect back with us, come and join the conversation in our Plan Tracker Facebook group as well, and we look forward to sending out the information or the invitation once we've scheduled our webinar, and we really look forward to you supplying your questions, asking your questions beforehand, so that Caroline and I can get our list, get all our ducks in a row, and we look forward to seeing you all again. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.